Well, it looks like we're close enough. I think we can go ahead and get started. Welcome to the ICC Region 1 Facebook page. Region 1 was established in 2014, and we're made up of 3 states: California, Hawaii, and Nevada. That would be kind of an interesting pairing. That includes 32 ICC chapters. We are dedicated to excellence in education and engagement to promote a safer environment by bringing individuals together. This happens to be our very second Facebook Live event, and these forums are really designed to highlight individuals of the chapters that make up the region of Region 1. Today we have Shane Diller, Assistant Director of Development Services with the City of Elk Grove and current President of Calbo. Thank you for joining us, Shane. I'm hoping that we're on the ICC Region 1 Facebook page. Shane and I were just talking about that. So if you have questions or comments, I can see them on the right-hand side of the screen. So please, feel free to ask those, ask away. With that, Shane, welcome. I'm glad to see that we've been able to connect, and It looks like you have 1 viewer, at least as of right now. So
excellent. Well, welcome 1 viewer. I'm happy to chat with you. If that grows.
Yeah. So
no,
Shane,
thanks for having me. It's great to be able to just connect with folks.
Yeah, and I think like we were talking earlier, being able to use technology better, and I think that is one of those keys that, I definitely want to try to utilize. Yeah, I kind of wish a lot of this stuff was available when I first got into the field, and so now it's like we talked about, it's grown exponentially. So. But I'd like to kind of begin with kind of your background. Can you describe your department in the area that you serve?
Sure. Yeah, I'm in Elk Grove, California, which is a city just south of Sacramento. We've got a population of about 175,000. We're mostly a residential community. I've always used the term bedroom community. I'm told that maybe in the urban planning world, that's a passé term at this point, but many of our residents prior to COVID would leave town every morning and head to Sacramento or the Bay Area for work. And so our primary work in building safety is in residential construction and property maintenance at homes and stuff like that. In 2004, I think it was 2004, 2005, we were listed as the fastest growing city in the United States. We were building houses during the housing boom as fast as you could do that. We've recently, in the last couple of years, been ranked again near the top fastest growing cities in the country. And fortunately, one measure, some organization listed us as the cleanest city in California last year. And so I was very pleased to read that, as code enforcement's one of my functions. I'm in the building safety division. I'm in the development services department. Building safety is one of 2 divisions that I oversee the daily operations of, one being code enforcement and one being building safety. And so my daily responsibilities are heavily engaged with those two fields and industries. We operate off of, or at least our building division is operated off of a contract model of government. We have a contractor in our west that provides us the building official below me, and then the staff for permitting, plans review, and inspection. So I have a really interesting role in managing that contract and playing the city's, the city side of the house as far as, representing to council and representing to the citizens, our building safety function. But then I've got a great team on the contract side that works with the builders and the applicants one-on-one to get all the work done. So it's really an interesting balance that we have, and it's an interesting role that I play as the assistant director in development services here.
Yeah, and I think that you hit on a key thing that many of us do, try to utilize that public-private partnership that definitely provides a great benefit. I don't think that any one department can do it alone. Being a fire marshal here where I'm at, it is a challenge because, I have a background in a lot of different things, but I don't have a background in everything. And so being able to have that public-private partnership is always a good thing because they have some additional tools that may not be available to me, which is great. So,
Absolutely. I'm the last person you want plan checking anything significant or inspecting anything detailed. So I need those people to do to do the great work that they do.
They do some great work. I can attest to that. Well, that kind of leads me into my next question. Is we all take different paths throughout our career. Can you describe the path and any notable experiences that really have shaped your perspective on not only code enforcement also but building safety?
Sure. Yeah, I come to this from a fairly unique professional path. I started working in local government as a teenager, and have worked in government, local government, and serving government for over 30 years now. And much of that was in law enforcement. I actually, right out of high school, went into the police academy and was a police officer, and eventually was appointed chief of police for a small city in the Sacramento River Delta called Ileton. And I was the police chief in Ileton, and then for a short period of time also their city manager. And that's where, as the police chief in a small city, there's not a lot of crime, obviously. I went there thinking I would be Andy and Mayberry, and that this would be, get to walk the streets and, throw Otis in the jail once a week or something. And it would be a fairly mellow way to do a law enforcement career. And in fact, the police department's responsibility included code enforcement, which was a heavy responsibility. So I learned a lot about the administrative side of enforcement, and building codes and nuisances and administrative enforcement processes and all these things, and frankly just fell in love with it. I had gone through my police career, and as I'd gone into the appointment as the chief in Ileton, I was a big fan of the broken windows theory of policing. Yeah. And the dealing with issues at a real small base level in order to reduce serious crime. And I saw how impactful code enforcement was on all levels in playing that role as broken windows theory policing, really in its purest form. And so after about 3 years or so, it came time for me to look for a larger city to work for, and I really fell in love with what I could do through broken windows policing, but as code enforcement. And so I looked for a code enforcement position that I wanted to sink my teeth into. And the city of Elk Grove was hiring at the time. So for, over the past 15 years, I have been with the city of Elk Grove. I was the code enforcement manager, and then moved in from there, kind of took on the building officials role when Rick Renfro retired. And then there was, some shuffling and some name changing. And for the last 5 years, my title has been Assistant Director of Development Services, still overseeing code enforcement and then also overseeing building safety. So I'm fortunate enough to be a government nerd. I'm not a code nerd by any stretch of the imagination. I'm a government administrative nerd, and I enjoy that role. I have pretty good street cred, if you will, when working jointly with our police department on issues, and working with our fire department on stuff. I was a volunteer firefighter when I was working in Ileton, so I spent 3 years with them teaching me which way to point the water and all that sort of stuff. I wouldn't say I was very good at it. Unfortunately, we didn't have a lot of fires, but I did have my own turnouts, and they did get a little dirty, so I feel good about that.
Well, that's good. And I think that you hit on a big thing. And, I talk to people about that broken window theory that a lot of people don't really realize what that's all about. But can you kind of describe that a little bit more? I think you kind of hit on it when you were talking about code enforcement and how, if you have a broken window, then that, may lead to other things. Can you maybe talk about how that
Absolutely.
I
could talk about broken windows policing all day long. So in 1982, so this goes back, a good 40 years, a criminologist named George Kelling and a public administration academic, James Q. Wilson, wrote this article called Broken Windows. And basically they used a building as an analogy for a community. And they said that if you have a building and you ignore the maintenance and the safety components of that building, basically through the start of one single broken window, that sends a signal to the people that live in the building and pass by the building that there is not care for that building. and
Right.
that lack of care and that signal you're sending with the single broken window will encourage bad actors to, perform worse acts, in
Yeah.
and around the building. And you will get vandalism, you'll get graffiti, the building will begin to deteriorate. And, they play this scenario out in their analogy to where eventually the building's abandoned, it can become a crack house and all these sorts of things that bring violence and serious crime. And what they're trying to explain there is that if you look at your community and if you demonstrate care for quality of life issues in your community and you deal with small issues, then you are less likely to have larger issues develop. And you're in a
Right.
position where if you can deal with nuisances and building maintenance and property maintenance and make sure that those small issues are handled, you then don't develop those larger issues. And there's been
Right.
other bodies of work, since broken windows, crime prevention through environmental design, CPTED, is a big one that has come along and also found some great scientific support for the fact that if you have well-maintained and well-lit and well-kept areas, it discourages criminal behavior. And so performing that code enforcement, getting out there and keeping things safe and healthy and aesthetically, pleasing, you're in a position where you're already ahead of the game in helping your police departments and your sheriff's agency or sheriff's offices, reduce the crime that they have to contend with on a daily basis.
Well, and I think that, we kind of talk about, and maybe that leads me into another question that I have is, you talk about your involvement in law enforcement and how that really kind of helped, with your role now. Really, code enforcement's the sum of many parts. I mean, like NFPA says, it's an ecosystem, but I do think it's a sum of many parts. And we all have gears and we all have roles and responsibilities that we work towards. And I think that you've hit on this quite a bit, especially with your background. But how do you build or work to build cooperative relationships with partners, with administering both building and fire codes?
My key, and especially at Elk Grove, one of the other both challenges and opportunities we have is that our fire department is provided by a special district. And
Mm-hmm.
so the city manager, the building official can't go to the city manager and say, I want you to tell the fire marshal to agree to X. It doesn't work like that.
Right.
And it shouldn't. For any of you that they're housed in the same place, don't do that. That's not how this should work. But it really comes down to communication. They say that communication is key, but I always think that advanced communication is a golden key, is the sort of thing that if you can form relationships with folks and meet them ahead of needing to collaborate, then you have a foundation of working, and cooperating, and you have an understanding of what their aims and their needs are in these circumstances. And they have a better understanding of yours. So that if you have to get together your fire prevention staff and the POP team from the police department and building inspectors and all these people to go deal with a problem property, having that communication, having relationships with those folks ahead of time, especially if they're outside your government, if they're in a different special district or a different city, having those relationships ahead of time helps grease the wheels when you need to sit down and formulate a plan and then execute that plan. We all know that code enforcement does not operate like 911. You don't swoop in and solve the problem at that moment and then wander off. There's noticing and there's corrections and there's hearings and there's things that stretch for months or years. And so this team that you've brought together are going to need to stay together and work fluidly for an extended period of time, and they have to restart that cycle each time a new property or a new situation crops up. So having those relationships ahead of time, I think, is key to being able to then hit the ground running on dealing with any particular problem you're going to tackle.
Yeah, and I think that that's a good perspective, and I think that a lot of people forget that is, we don't always want to operate in a crisis or chaos mode. We want to build those relationships much more ahead of time and be able to have those discussions, especially as things become a little bit more stressful and strained, but to know where the other side or the other position is and being able to kind of work within those boundaries is always a good thing. And I think that, as time goes on, many of us are starting to, kind of figure out, those roles and responsibilities a bit more. So yeah, perspective is key when it comes to it. And if you can understand the other's perspective, I think that's great.
Whenever and this is my bet to the building officials watching, to the inspectors, the officials, to those folks out there, the best advice I can give you on this front is that when you first meet a new fire prevention officer or fire marshal or someone from your police department's POP team, you can do what I do. And I always make sure that they understand when I'm talking to fire folks, listen, I've seen every episode of Emergency. I know how this works. And it works the same for the cops. I just say, hey, listen, I've seen every episode of Cops. I know how this works. I've got a plan. Then they understand that you're working from a place of respect.
Yeah.
And can proceed from there.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think that, I've kind of got the same thing that you have. I have a law enforcement background. And so understanding some of those things on that other side, now I'm on the fire side and understanding the law enforcement background and that I think it gives you a little bit more of a holistic kind of approach, especially as it relates back to code enforcement. I will say that I had to be a lot better with my communication skills, maybe in law enforcement, because, and even in code enforcement in a sense, it's allowed me to really develop my communication skills a lot better and be able to articulate what I'm trying to get across. It may not be the best sometimes. I remember I told somebody that they needed to put Romex wiring in a junction box. When I came back for an inspection, they'd put it in a cardboard box. And so sometimes those things happen. So, but you try to improve in your communication as much as you can.
Right, exactly, yes. You try to meet them where they're at, absolutely.
Yes. So throughout your career, what type of changes have you seen, that really have kind of benefited the industry and kind of code enforcement and building safety? Kind of a big question, I think, as I think about it.
When you talk about benefiting things, I think I really focus on the technology changes that I've just seen in the 15 years I've been here. When I got here, we were still operating primarily off of paper files and paper notices and paper corrections and those sorts of things. And just the technology, even before the accelerator that was COVID, just moving into the technology that we've seen in the last few years, where inspectors are now using iPads in the field, and our plans examiners are using electronic plan review systems that no longer require these giant rolls of plans and triplicates to show up at the counter. The nuts and bolts of the job is still the same, but the technology we've been able to leverage so that if nothing else, we save archive space. I don't have walls and walls of rolled plans and permit files like we used to. And, to know that, correction notices when they're entered electronically and you hit submit, or automatically, there's no waiting for them to get it in the mail or a runner coming and picking it up. You can send it at 11 a.m. and they can have the, corrections read and a draft back to you. I apologize. Draft back to you by 4 p.m. that day in some cases. It's just a tremendous improvement to what we do.
Yeah, it builds efficiencies, and that's kind of one of those things that I have seen, as you mentioned, going from paper to an iPad and being able to send notices almost instantaneously while you're out in the field. It's just so much more efficient. And I will say that it's also easier to read because some of our handwriting is not the best. And so it definitely, allows us to do this. But also, too, I think that it helps with some of the liability, especially when you're trying to, share with the customer or the contractor what you want them to do. And you can express it a little bit more and a little bit more cleanly and clearly through those electronic means. So
absolutely.
So how do you engage with ICC and the International Code Council? Being part of Region 1, how do you engage with ICC?
I have 3 levels of engagement that I've noticed. And, obviously as a member, I engage with them, through, the traditional methods everyone else does, through the certifications, through the website and the training. I really enjoy not having to go somewhere and sit down and bring my books to do cert training or anything like that. I like the advances that ICC's made with the digital training and the digital certification tests and stuff that go on with that. Again, being a government nerd, not a code nerd, I make sure I get out of the way and I let the code development folks, work on proposals and attend hearings and give us good feedback, in regards to what to support and not to support. I'm very self-aware in where my weaknesses lie, and so I don't make sure that no matter what my title is, I don't write in and go, oh, well, I think that all doors should swing this one. No, there's no way that that I'm that guy, and I know that. So I get out of their way, and I don't get involved much in the code development stuff and the hearings that go on. I let the folks that are experts of that do that, and then support their calls when they need help with that. And then, of course, as a chapter leader, as the current president of Calbo, Calbo and ICC are heavily engaged in advocacy efforts and training efforts. There's lots of statewide issues that ICC, even though they're an international organization, California is, one of their biggest chunks of membership. Calbo's, I think, their single largest chapter. And so we're heavily engaged with Susan Dowdy as the GR rep, and Sarah Yerke's above her on issues related to California, whether it's legislation we're supporting or opposing.
Right.
Or just general advocacy. We collaborated on a seismic roundtable in 2019 that brought hundreds of people physically into the Capitol building in Sacramento to sit down and talk about seismic resiliency and seismic threats and what we need to do, both from a code design standard and also to from a legislative and policy standard. That was a great effort that still, the fruits of that are continuing to this day with different things. It's very it's very engaging, when you're in chapter leadership, to be able to connect with ICC as a whole, and then with Region 1 as a regional body, and then individually with the chapters in California at the local level, being able to connect with them. Prior to COVID, my role on the Calbo board allowed me to see parts of California I never would have seen in person, probably, and connect with great people that I never would have met, if I had just stayed in my office in Elk Grove. Yeah. And so this ICC family has been both personally rewarding and professionally rewarding for me, to be able to connect with folks. And now through COVID, I was actually able to connect with more people because all the meetings moved virtually. And so I was able to attend chapter meetings in various parts of the state without having to get on the Southwest taxi to go anywhere. And it improved my ability to attend meetings I wouldn't be able to normally. So as a chapter leader, ICC weaving all that together is great. And then lastly, I'm an instructor in the BIT program at Consumers River College. And so I'm able to, we teach the I codes in the program. And so I'm able to connect with ICC as an instructor of their material, teaching the I codes, and then also be able to connect my students with their website for certification and for, great YouTube videos on the, history of code and all these sorts of things that, new people entering the field can get right out of the gate through the great stuff that ICC puts out. And I can't leave out, Susan Dowdy will scowl at me when I see her next, if I leave out the fact that ICC's podcast is terrific innovation and a use of new communication technology that I was really pleased to see they jumped into. So I make sure the students know the podcast is there. I listen to the podcast when new ones roll out. And so it's, they're making great efforts to stay connected with all of us, and I certainly appreciate that.
Well, and I think that we talked about perspective, and it allows you to connect more with other people from outside the region. Like I'm looking at, we have a comment here from somebody from Maine, And so we're definitely reaching, really across the country, which is outstanding. And we wouldn't have been able to do that without, platforms like that were like
Absolutely.
this. So this is amazing. So I'm glad to see that. You hit on Calbo, and I do want to ask you about Calbo. Kind of, can you describe really what the mission of Calbo is and how you work to develop and assist code professionals? As you mentioned, you are reaching people in all parts of the state of California, anywhere from probably the Central Valley up to the Sierra and probably down to the LA Basin. And that's quite a wide swath. I mean, we could be in snow, or we could be along the coast, or we could be in the desert. So how do you really how do you develop and assist those code professionals?
Calbo's entering its 60th year, and over those years, it's held fairly firm to principles that, our role is to be that sort of statewide system of connection, so that folks that are beachfront in Southern California stay, connected and informed with folks that are in the Sierra Nevadas. And, Calbo sort of sees itself as playing that role. I think it really boils down to two primary missions. Calbo has one of advocacy, which is that we're able to act and perform as a statewide representative to the building safety industry, and specifically to building officials. We have great partnerships with the FPOs and with Cal Chiefs on the fire side, to where we form a constituency there, that when there are issues in the Capitol or in the regulatory agencies that relate to building or fire safety, we're able to really carry some weight in regards to what we advocate there. Not all bills go our direction, and sometimes our goal is to get a bad bill that we know is going to pass at least better than what was originally proposed. And so there's lots of stuff that gets passed that we in the end aren't terribly excited about, or just downright kind of ticked that it was approved and signed by the governor. But we know that along the way, those things steadily we get them amended, and we get them tweaked in a way through these partnerships and this statewide collaboration we're able to perform, to make sure that it's, that those bills, if you will, are in fact, more tolerable and more palatable to our industry than they would have been otherwise. And then the other side of the house, as far as our two primary missions, is training. We're able to put together, quality state-specific training that California agencies can tap into, and can now take virtually. Whereas, prior to, we'd have our ed weeks, and we'd cram thousands of people over a week into hotels spread across the state and get great training to them. Now we have both webinars and hybrid models, because we need to make sure that people are still getting quality training. They're getting their CEUs for certs that they need to keep and maintain, and that sort of stuff. But when you boil it down to it, it's really those two efforts. It's, Calbo training and advocacy. And Calbo is perfectly situated as a statewide organization to be able to provide that blanket, if you will, that covers whether you're trying to learn the significant changes to a 2016, building code in the Shasta Cascades or at the San Diego chapter. We're able to provide something that will apply to all of you. Recently, with the advent of virtual training, it does start to attract interest from outside the state, because you do have architects and contractors and stuff that are brought into California to do work. That land here, and they get their first plan review comments back, and the very first comment is, sheet A1 references the 2019 I code, and and so you have to start over with your code analysis. And so we're able to get training to folks that, if you might have clients that are, and you can just webinar in or join a virtual training or something to be able to get some training if you're out of state. And the technology certainly helps us leverage that.
Well, that was actually, I'm glad that you brought that up. I understand that Calbo is the California building officials, but having, now we have that where we can touch people from outside the state do you allow people maybe from outside the state and maybe not building officials to be able to join Calbo, and how do they go about doing that? I guess would be my question.
Yeah, Calbo's membership is structured so that the voting members, so if you're going to serve on the board, or you're going to be a voting member at, to vote on bylaws changes or vote for officers, you're an agency representative. So you are what we call the class 1 member from that agency. That could be, and the agency gets to decide who that is. Elk Grove has decided that's me as the Assistant Director of Development Services. It could have been the director. He could have decided, I want to be the class 1 member, or it could, roll downhill to a senior inspector, or to a fire marshal, or to whoever the agency is determining they want to be that class 1 member. And so we look at the term building official more broadly, I think, than previous generations have, in that, any of us working in that building safety space, we're all code officials, and we're all, building safety officials. And though, the organization is named California Building Officials, and that class 1 membership is a single representative from that agency. And then anyone else, once you have that class 1 membership, anyone else can take training and attend conferences, May 17th to the 20th in Newport Beach, if anybody's interested. Information's on the website. And tap into the resources that we have. You're right, it's becoming a much more broad audience to what we're doing as an industry than just the the fire marshals and the building officials in the various agencies getting together and talking about how kids these days don't know anything, and I've got this. It's not like that anymore. It's an evolving. And no, I'm not speaking to any one of you in particular out there, but it's a new generation, a new sort of take on what we consider not only our membership, but the people that really need and should be participating in the advocacy and the training that is so valuable to get out there.
Well, and I think you bring up a good point about bridging that gap between building and fire officials with maybe designers, and trying to get on that level playing field. We talked about, building those partnerships, and I think that they're one of those partners that we can definitely learn from. And I think that goes a long way to build that rapport, especially when there are maybe disagreements on code interpretations, because those do happen from time to time. So, and so I think that building a partnership and having that is great. And you brought up your conference. I will say that I have not attended the virtual offering, but I will tell you that I've heard very, very good things about the virtual offering. And so I'm looking forward to the upcoming May. Was it May 17th?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. When we first rolled out, because we did a virtual training in December. And when we rolled out this plan, we thought to ourselves, is anyone in the world going to want to sit through basically sort of a day-long connection, 6 hours minus the lunch of, connecting with us? And we got good feedback, and your feedback is great, because we did hear that the way that we figured out how to present it, and the way we do breaks and commercials and various things, that it's much more digestible and palatable to attendees for the conference, and to train people that are looking at training in the virtual realm. That we sort of found a way to do it well. So I thank you for that. That is reassuring to hear, because it's all we're testing waters here. It's all brand new stuff to us.
Yeah, and I'm excited to give it a go. I just attended the California Fire Prevention Institute, and I think it was kind of modeled after that. And it was interesting to see. Like, we had instructors from across the country. I mean, we had somebody from, a retired chief from Tualatin Valley, Oregon. And then we also had Michael O'Brien out of Brighton, Michigan, provide courses. And it was good to kind of see. And there was even, a couple other people from the East Coast. And to get, you would kind of get that training, but I don't think you would have access to as much of it without the technology platforms that we have now.
Agreed. Yeah, so, no, you can, and we've got, just on a couple of the blocks that I'm moderating, workshops and stuff I'm doing, I've got attendees from New Jersey with ISO that are going to talk about rating systems and evaluations. that, yeah, getting them, in physically in a room in Newport Beach is, as much as they'd probably love to come to Newport Beach regularly,
Yeah.
it's probably not feasible, but they're going to be able to be zoomed in
Yeah.
and in a professional way, like you saw with the way CFPI put on the recent training, to where we can connect people around the world into these rooms now for collaboration and training. It's really a good era to be in.
Yeah, I agree 100%. So we talk about technology, and what types of systems do you currently use and operate, and what are you kind of exploring to use? I mean, we kind of talk about COVID, and I think that's kind of spurred or spawned a lot of new technology, anywhere from these virtual meeting platforms like we talked about earlier. But what else have you guys implemented in Elk Grove along the way?
COVID's an interesting story, because in 2019, we were working with our IT department in Elk Grove to begin to figure out what we were going to do to really become an electronic permitting agency. We were not doing electronic permitting at that time. We were still, we were still getting, solar permits via fax going into COVID. And in the summer of 2019, we just sat down and we said, we may not have a lot of money to be able to go out and just buy fancy software and to make wholesale changes with what we're doing, but the rest of our lives have been able to figure out how to work in the digital space. So we literally just sat down and made a list of a function we perform, and then any technology that we had at our fingertips that would accomplish that. And so we created this patchwork electronic permitting plan that included everything from just Google Dropboxes for plan submittal, to emails for communication, spreadsheets in Word and Excel, just anything we could do with the technology we had at our fingertips to get going. And we had all that sort of ready, and we're like, okay, well, when do we test this? When do we pull the trigger on it? And then March 18th of 2020 arrived, and we said, well, it's today. We're going to start using this stuff now. And literally from the time the city manager said, listen, we're going to close City Hall, figure out how to do this, it was minutes before we were able to say, we're ready. Building safety can go. And then, of course, planning and engineering looked at us and said, we're going to do what they do. And we were off to the races. Development services moved on a dime, because we had looked outside the box of just purchasing a system, and just looked at our fingertips and said, what do we have right now where if I couldn't come to the building or leave the building, I'd still be able to do our job? And so we just layered in a bunch of stuff we already had. Now, going forward, of course, we're now in an era where we're looking at that going, all right, what's working and what do we keep? Because the one piece we added on March 18th of 2020 was virtual inspection through FaceTime, through through Apple or Samsung, just video conferencing systems. And so we developed ways and verification systems and stuff to where we were able to use FaceTime primarily to do virtual inspections on things, so that our customers didn't feel much of a glitch there. There were some we actually had to reach out to that we hadn't heard from and said, hey, we're still working, right? I mean, you can call for this inspection. We can keep you moving. It's something I was pleased that Calbo and other leaders in the industry did as well, was we jumped on advocating not only for local government and for what we do in building safety and fire safety, but for the industry we serve, and saying, hey, Governor Newsom, housing is a critical crisis. You must keep these builders moving. They've got to be considered essential. And, very quickly had revised health orders that included, the construction industry as an essential service. And so, we just literally took whatever we could at our fingertips and kept moving. And now we're in a window where we're like, okay, what's working, but maybe we want to improve on it. And maybe there's actually a packaged software that will do this.
What you need.
Yes. I mean, we use at Elk Grove, just to be specific, at Elk Grove, we use Central Square's community engagement module, which used to be called Track It. And so we use Track It for most of our tracking and permit issuance and inspection documentation and stuff like that. And then we use Bluebeam for plan check and review and return. And of course, I'm just being specific as to what we're using. There's obviously lots of good, systems out there that that perform those things, but we do have some industry specific software that we're doing there. And then we've added all these things like drop boxes and email systems and stuff to that skeleton to be able to really have a cradle to grave electronic permitting system.
Yeah, and I think that we're kind of the same way. We've kind of layered a lot of different things. We utilize Bluebeam and Track It, and then we also have a fire department related software that we use for inspections, and then we use Dropbox and email. And I think that without having all of these other systems to kind of work and connect together, that interplay just wouldn't happen. I think the bigger thing for me as I move forward is storage. Now is just trying to find all the areas to be able to store it. So in that infrastructure, and so I'm looking more towards cloud storage now. It's like, okay, well, where can I put this information and how can I house it in a format that my inspectors can drag it from the field and be able to say, well, yeah, you had permits and these were the permits that you pulled over the last 10 years. None of that work was permitted, and you can have that conversation with that building owner. And so many of those files are, I can remember looking at files throughout my career back, dating decades ago. And so being able to try to shift to that and be able to make them so that they're more tangible and they're more readily available for everybody would be outstanding. So I agree. I think that there are a lot of things, and I think that we're just really on the tip of what we're going to see coming here in the not too distant future. So.
No, I think so. Kind of like how we thought, we should have really leveraged into some of these web platforms. I'm trying to figure out what the big new permitting stuff's going to be, so I can sink some Bitcoin or something into that. Absolutely.
Yeah, that we're riding high on Bitcoin right now. So I've seen I've seen those. It's going pretty high right now. So. Well, Shane, I've got one last question, and the reason why I wanted to have you on, right before May was for building safety. So in May we celebrate the 41st Building Safety Month, and so, what ways can organizations educate their stakeholders and really bring awareness to building safety issues that you've seen be successful, and maybe things that you implement up in Elk Grove?
Building Safety Month is our best pre-made opportunity to tell good stories. Mm-hmm. And so, as an agency or as a department, if you have the ability to take a look at the weekly themes and the various things that have come with that year's Building Safety Month and figure out what good stories you have to tell related to those themes. And, it's an opportunity through the adoption of resolutions declaring, Building Safety Month and supporting the industry to be able to get before your elected officials and, give an annual, feel-good report. How much work did you, and this is one of the amazing stories that everyone likes to hear, is how much work did your agency do during the lockdown? Like during the year that was the lockdown of COVID from March to March. Look at the permitting numbers you did, and you tell that story of how many permits not only were still applied for, meaning that the industry was working, but that your folks processed and your teams inspected and finaled and opened in, the greatest economic, downturn in that short a period of time that we've had probably since the 1930s. That's a great story to tell. And you have that opportunity through Building Safety Month to find nuggets like that and to weave those into the weekly themes through social media and through presenting to your councils or your board of supervisors or your district boards, what good work you're doing. Those are stories you could tell all year long, but Building Safety Month is really ready-made for you to get up and be able to, just tell good stories about your teams and about the work they do.
Yeah, and I think that, I like how you said that being able to show how much work and what really it took to be able to process permits, be able to go out and do inspections and plan reviews. And most of us have been working remotely over the, really the last 14 months, and still being able to meet the need of many of the contractors and the developers. And it's, I will say for us, me we have kind of not seen really a slowdown. I think it's been probably one of the busiest years we've ever had, because many people, continue to do, and as you mentioned, Calbo, making sure to work with the governor's office to really stress how essential building construction truly is. And I will say that definitely helped, and we've seen, really a big growth, I think, on new construction, and I hope that continues as we go through this recovery. So
absolutely.
All right, Shane. Well, I appreciate it. This was great. I mean, 45 minutes of fun. We've had
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I apologize, everybody. I'm incredibly shy, so I hope I came off as, somewhat informative.
No, I really appreciate this. Being on the fire side, I always like to talk to building officials. One of my best friends is a building official, and he and I share a lot of different things, and we talk about a lot of different things. So it's always good to hear different perspectives. I think that when we work in silos, sometimes we don't always get, as we talked about earlier, the perspective. And so I like to be able to bring people together, and I think that this is a great platform. So I've been able to talk to you now and Sam Palmer out of Las Vegas and hear about his stories about the Strip and things like that.
Absolutely.
It's just amazing to talk, across. I really think that Region 1 has probably the biggest diversity. We have California, Nevada, and Hawaii. And so I'd really like to talk to some folks from Hawaii, and hopefully you're watching, because I'd really like to talk about the island state and, some of the struggles we talk about that we have. We understand that, building construction is going really, really well right now, but we also understand materials are hard to come by. And so I'd kind of like to talk about that too. So.
No, that's good. We should go there to do that. Let's see.
I think that's a great idea.
Could do like a couch on the beach, like a talk show. I'm down.
Hey, I think you've hit on something really good. If you can pitch it to ICC, maybe they can throw a little bit more money towards us to be able to do that. We'll do all episodes from Hawaii. I think
exactly. There you go. Live from Hawaii, Region 1. I like that. That's good.
I don't think that's probably going to happen, but
we'll lobby for it though, one way or the other. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right, Shane. Well, I appreciate it. I hope you have a good rest of your day, and I really thank you for joining us.
Happy to do it. Thanks.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.